We sheltered a Dogman in winter. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My late wife and I sheltered a Dogman over a few winters in a part of Wisconsin very close to the Minnesota border. I saw the beast, bigger than any man, with my own eyes. My wife once saw 4 of the dog-headed upright walking beasts at one time when I wasn't there. This was a very long time ago, and I am no longer a young man, so I am dictating this to my 35-year-old grandson, who has promised me that he will edit it until it is coherent. My grandson is who alerted me to your channel, asking me if these stories aren't in fact about a kind of creature that my wife and I had to deal with way back before that young man was even born. It's a story we told sometimes at family gatherings, but we didn't call it a werewolf or anything like that. It was not magical or mystical to us. It was a very real problem. We didn't know that this was a controversial animal. We didn't realize that it didn't officially exist. Of course, I'm talking about what you call a dogman, but what my wife and I once called an extremely dangerous nuisance. I'm gonna retell you the stories as well as I can. To be honest, I remember these old events more clearly lately than I remember what I had for dinner last night. So I'll toss in all the details that are still up there in my memory. My wife Martha left us some years back, so I'll be flying solo on this one. What happened was that Martha and I decided we had saved up enough to get a summer vacation home. I couldn't really take much time off from work, so having a home in the country woods, close enough for me to drive to work from, was the way I relaxed a bit more during the summer months. I was putting in just as many hours of labor, but I was enjoying myself 10 times as hard at night and on the weekends. Some of the parties we threw out there were epic, even by modern standards. Although 99% of the time, it was just me and the missus out there alone. Now, this was the late 1950s, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm unsure what the real dates of this were. Let's say 57 or 58, maybe 59. There was a period after I got my promotion at work, and we got married in 1955, through 1962 when our first child magically appeared, when everything was the same all the time for us. It all blends together in my memory, and the only thing that sticks out as different is the saga of the Dogman. That's probably why I remember it so sharply, but I'm a bit vague on when exactly this all took place. At least I'm certain of the order of events. It was the spring of 1957, or probably 58, when I drove Martha out to the house to open it up for the summer. At the time, we had been told that the winters were too harsh to live in at that house, but about 17 or 18 years afterward, we actually had a Christmas gathering there. It could have been a year-round house, but whatever. In those days, it was our summer home. That meant we closed it up around Halloween, usually. And we opened it up around Easter. I'd head out with Martha to do the heavier work of cleaning and neatening up on a Saturday. And then I'd go back to work on Monday, while she'd stay out there and finish setting it all up and turning it into a home. Now, this place was in western Wisconsin, near the Fish Lake wildlife areas. It's really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the streets do have street signs, but they aren't even paved. You drive down dirt roads that only stay roads because of the traffic. Parts of the road that get driven over less have bits of grass growing up out of them. But the advantage of living there was that it was usually just 2 hours or less, depending on traffic, to get into Minneapolis where I worked. Having come from Minnesota, I was not familiar with the Wisconsin werewolf or the Michigan Dogman. I've heard since that the legends of both stretched back to before that era in the 1950s, but Martha and I had never heard of either back then. So when we drove out to open the house that spring and discovered a Dogman inhabiting our basement, we really didn't know what to make of it. We had a number of encounters with this beast, but now I'm going to tell you about the first time we ever saw him, which was almost the last time for poor Martha. I was in the front of the house, opening windows and airing the place out, Martha was in the kitchen in the back, and she decided to open the door to the basement and move some supplies down there for storage. When she opened the kitchen door leading to the darkened steps to the cellar, though, she was met with a foul odor. Maybe the word stench is more appropriate. She told me she almost gagged at that first wave of bad air emerging from the basement, and then she thought she saw something moving around down there in the darkness. She had to climb down the first step in order to turn the basement lights on. But when she did, she looked down and saw a huge, hairy, dog-headed humanoid down there, staring right back at her. This was the most top-heavy creature God ever decided to give life to. I saw it myself later, as I will get to, and I'm telling you, the chest and shoulders were so massive that the shorter legs at the bottom made the creature look like he was going to topple over at any moment. But those two hind legs it stood on made up for their relatively brief length by being massively muscled, fantastically strong, and able to move lightning fast. Now, in this case, when I'm calling the legs short, you should understand, his legs were about as tall as my legs, but its head would be way higher off the ground than my head. So all that height was made up of the midsection and torso, the chest and the belly, basically. On top of all that fur and muscle was the scariest looking dog head I'd ever seen. It wasn't exactly like a dog. It was sort of like a proto-dog. Like an earlier, more primitive, far too large design of what a wolf or dog could be. Its teeth were too large. Its chest was too wide. Its front legs had been designed more as arms. And the creature almost looked more like a human bodybuilder than he did a wolf or a canine. Honestly, standing a dog up creates a very different kind of an animal look, and an even scarier one, in my opinion. My wife Martha, in opening that basement door, had alarmed and upset the Dogman down there. When she turned on the lights and screamed, the Dogman blew up. In front of the house I heard Martha scream, and then a large dog barking and snarling and growling. I ran toward the back of the house, envisioning a horrible scene about to greet me. When I got back to the kitchen, I saw my wife on the floor, weeping. The basement door and the kitchen door were both open, but there was no dog anywhere to be seen. After I got her up and soothed her for a while, Martha was eventually able to tell me about this large dog that stood up like a man. She said she discovered him in the basement, and he charged up the stairs, pushing her out of his way in the process, resulting in her crashing to the kitchen linoleum. The animal man then escaped through the kitchen door, which I ran outside of as well, to look around. The ground was hard, and I'm not much of a tracker anyway, so I couldn't even guess as to which direction the beast had run in. Heading down to the basement, I discovered that the animal seemed to have spent the entire winter down there. I could see where he slept. I could see where he had eaten. I could see what he had eaten. And I had the wonderful job of cleaning it all up. No, I didn't save any of it for DNA, so don't even ask. This was the late 1950s. Nobody was saving poo for DNA in those days, just trust me. I don't even remember if I knew what DNA was back then. And like I mentioned before, neither Martha nor I knew that this was an unknown animal. We had not even heard of Bigfoot in those days, okay? I don't honestly remember Bigfoot becoming something in the culture until the late 60s or early 70s. I had heard of the Loch Ness Monster, but I had never heard the word cryptid. So I cleaned the basement out, and the creature did not return. Over the course of that summer, I had some contractors come out to look at the cellar and figure out how the thing got in and out. Initially, we had no idea, but one of the guys discovered that if he crawled under the front porch of the house, there was in fact a window he could slide through into the basement. Now, I don't understand what function that window would have ever served other than letting animals in, since the porch seems to have been original with the house. but that window seems to have been as well. At any rate, I had them brick the window up, and I hoped that would be the end of our winter-time squatter. The next spring, it was my turn to open those basement doors and have the animal man down there freak out at me. This time I had gone out with my off-duty cop friend to the house and left Martha at home. I'm glad I did, too, because this time the dogman charged up those stairs at me so quickly that I could not get out of the way in time. I slammed backward, hard, onto the linoleum, as the beast landed hard on top of me. This thing weighed more than any man, and with it on my chest, breathing was no longer an option. It barked loudly in my face, and I couldn't even smell its dog breath because I couldn't even sniff at the air. The creature was in a rage, bellowing and snarling at me, drooling on my face, baring its primeval teeth at me, and I began to wonder if I was about to find my life ending, or maybe something even worse. Maybe I was about to be hurt by this thing in such a bad way that I'd wish it had just ended me instead. There was nothing I could do, and the blackness was starting to creep in from the edges of my vision. I was about to pass out. That was when my off-duty cop friend burst in, firing his weapon loudly to scare the beast off of me. He told me later that the dogman stood up quickly and banged the back of his head so hard on the kitchen ceiling that it made a loud whacking sound. That's how tall this thing was when it was on its hind legs like that. The monster man looked as if he were about to attack my friend, according to him, and he was aiming to blow a new hole in the creature's face, when suddenly the dogman had a change of heart. He pushed his way out through the back door and escaped once again. So we discovered that the bricks in the front window under the porch crawl space were still intact. It appeared to have scratch marks on it, as though someone or something had been trying to pull it apart, but it was very much still intact. The kitchen door, however, was broken. The creature had just used his strength to pull it open when it was supposed to push in. He had broken it around the doorknob and lock, and the door frame too. Now both were useless and needed to be replaced. This cost more to fix than the previous year, as I got high security doors for the front and back, and I replaced all the windows with ones that were supposed to be harder to break into. I also had very sturdy wooden shutters put on every window to make them even a little bit harder to break into. That entire summer I obsessed over getting the house ready to withstand its next attempted break-in by the dog-headed bear man that coming winter. I remember having various guys out to fix things, and them asking me what kind of an animal did this damage. I was honest with them that I wasn't really sure what it was. It was at least as large as a bear, but it didn't seem to be a bear. It was sort of a dog-headed bear, but with hands. None of them really gave me much of a reaction at the time. I mean, nobody said, "That's the dogman," on the one hand, but nobody said there's no such thing as what you're describing on the other. Clearly there was something like that, and these men were looking at the damage it left in its wake. So ultimately the solution to the problem was actually thought up by my wife. She didn't stop me from shoring up our house's security, but she figured the dogman was gonna come back to this area to look for shelter in the winter pretty much no matter what we did. And without us there to keep it out, it would eventually get back down to that basement. My wife's solution was not cheap, but it was less expensive than everything else I'd been doing, and it actually worked, so it was worth the price. Here's what she suggested. We needed to build a rudimentary shelter the same size as our basement on our land in the back of the house. She pointed out that the hollow in the back had some pockets or possibly sinkholes that were about 9 or 11 feet deep. If we covered that over with an easy-to-access entrance, the dog-headed bear man might choose it over our basement. Once we had created the shelter, I thought she might be a genius and this might actually work. On our last day out there, I went into town to a butcher's shop I'd seen, and I bought out a large quantity of the crappiest cuts he had. I explained it was to trap a wild animal, and that quantity was more important than quality in this case. I put most of the meat inside the entrance of the hovel we had created, hanging the rest from trees at a height that would hopefully only allow access to that creature, or maybe some normal kinds of bears. Then we left for the winter to our home in southeastern Minnesota, and we hoped our plan would work. Well, I hoped. My wife knew. She was so confident that the plan would work that she told me she would go out to the house first that next year, and she wouldn't need me to go with her. Of course, I forbade her from doing that. Husbands could forbid people in those days. Well, I mean, we thought we could forbid our wives. In this instance, Martha promised me that she wouldn't head out to the Dogman house until I could go with her. Then, she secretly drove up there alone while I was at work one Friday. It was there that she had the sighting of the multiple creatures. I think I mentioned that in the beginning of this. What happened was this. Martha drove up there and went right into the house with no fear, cleaning and dusting and airing it all out. Then she went into the basement to put some things down there and bring some other things up. She never had any doubt that the coast would be clear, and in fact there were no invaders in the home on that day. In the later afternoon, I got a call at my office from her, which was something that usually meant an emergency had happened. This time she was not panicked, and she did not sound distressed. My heart was beating fast just because of how rarely she would call me at work, so I sort of demanded that she tell me if she was okay, and what was wrong. Martha insisted that nothing was wrong, and she seemed to think it was funny that I was reacting that way. She told me that she was out at the summer house, and she'd just seen the most remarkable thing. At this point, I felt like exploding. I didn't want to hear about what she'd seen. I wanted to know why she'd broken her promise to me, and put herself at risk by heading out to that dangerous place without me and my cop friend first checking it out and clearing it for her. I didn't feel that this was a subject I could discuss at work, since the walls of my office were quite thin. And it was not a place or a time in history for people with complicated personal lives. Yes, it was almost the 60s, but it wasn't the 60s yet. This was a very buttoned-down time, and you didn't want to stand out in the crowd. You wanted to fit in. So I listened, gritting my teeth, as my wife told me about this event. We would throw sheets over the furniture before we left in the winter, because Martha found it easier to clean the dust out of the sheets than out of the furniture when we came back in the spring. So she was hanging those sheets she had washed out on the clothesline behind our house when she had the sighting of a lifetime. There, at the edge of the woodline, walking from her left to her right, in single file, were not one, but 4 of the dog-headed bear creature people. Of course, at this point, I was still listening to her, but I was already sorting through my belongings and getting ready to leave work early. I clearly had to get out to the summer home before something terrible happened. Martha said the one in the front of the parade was huge, and it was probably the one that knocked both of us down on those 2 different occasions. Behind him was a shorter one, which she took to be his wife, to use her terminology. Behind the wife were 2 shorter offspring. Martha saw the nuclear family and everything back then. She was just very family-centric, so I didn't immediately accept her interpretation of this scene. For all I knew, it was a gang of dogmen of various sizes moving in to make life for us unlivable at that house. I hopped in the car and drove out to the house to continue the conversation, and it was just about to start to get dark as I arrived. Grabbing a flashlight, I headed out to the hovel we had created. Sure enough, it did appear to have been lived in, and to me, it did look like multiple creatures had been living in that space. I did not see any of them around, however, and so I headed back to the house to hear the rest of Martha's story. She told me that the 2 dogmen taking up the rear of that parade were as tall as me, and I'm a 6-foot tall man. If we assume the figure leading the pack to be the 11-foot one that bowled us both over in its escape attempts, then the one presumed to be the wife by Martha would have had to have been 7 or 8 feet tall. We argued with each other over the handling of it, and we both drove our separate cars back to the city to spend the night there and to prepare to open the house properly the next day. Well, I kept an eye on that Dogman hovel all summer, and it appeared to have been abandoned. All through the season, neither of us saw any evidence of their presence at all. By the next spring, we noticed that the hovel had not been used over that winter. This made no sense to me, but it made a lot of sense to my wife. He's a married man now, she explained in her unique way. He needed to go out and find a bigger home for his family. And I guess that must have been what happened, because I never heard about that beast again, except for when relatives and friends asked us to tell the old monster dog stories again. And I don't really blame them for asking to hear all those anecdotes over and over. After all, we sheltered a Dogman in winter. I don't even want to do the math about where we'd be without our Kath. Please join us in thanking Kathy Barrickman for being today's executive producer. We thank Kathy with every episode, but today we're honoring her for being a top-tier member now for 2 years straight. That's 24 of your human months. Of course, Kathy is more than just an executive producer to us, but if you would like to get the same perks she gets, then check out our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman, as he lays down the factoids. Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.